After losing my house, I moved in with my son and his wife. They treated me like their maid. On her birthday morning, she ordered, "Clean everything and cook a proper dinner for once. My CEO is coming tonight. Just serve us and leave." But when her CEO saw me, he froze. "Oh my God, aren't you the woman who—" "Yes, I was." "Maggie, get that disgusting mess off the floor before my CEO arrives." Nora's voice cut through the morning silence like a whip. I stood there, coffee dripping from my trembling hands onto her pristine white marble, watching 47 years of marriage reduced to brown stains on cold stone. At 68, I'd become the unpaid maid in what was supposed to be my sanctuary. If you're watching this, subscribe and let me know where you're watching from. Let me take you back to how I ended up scrubbing floors on my daughter-in-law's birthday instead of being treated like family. 2 years ago, when my Robert died suddenly, I thought my son David would be my rock. I was wrong about everything. "Mom, you can't manage that big house alone," David had said, his concerned expression masking something I couldn't identify yet. "Nora and I have plenty of space. It'll be perfect." But I noticed how he avoided eye contact, fidgeting with his coffee cup like a guilty teenager. Perfect. That word should have been my first warning. The house sale happened faster than I could process my grief. David handled everything while I was drowning in funeral arrangements and insurance paperwork. "Don't worry about the details. Mom, we'll take care of you." But care and control, I learned, are two very different things. The first month felt like an extended visit. Nora smiled when David was around, asked about my day, even cooked my favorite pot roast once. But when David traveled for work, which was often, the mask slipped. "Maggie, since you're not working, maybe you could help with the dishes." Became, "Maggie, the kitchen's a disaster. Clean it up." Small requests became demands. Suggestions became orders. David noticed. I'm sure he did. I caught him watching sometimes when Nora snapped at me about loading the dishwasher wrong or folding towels incorrectly. But he'd just clear his throat and find somewhere else to be. The guest room became my prison. My beautiful china cabinet, the one Robert built for our 20th anniversary, somehow never found space in their perfectly designed home. My photos with Robert disappeared from common areas because they clashed with the aesthetic. I told myself it was temporary adjustment. Grief makes people behave strangely, I reasoned. David was busy with his promotion at the bank. Nora was stressed with her marketing company. I was the convenient scapegoat for their frustrations. But this morning, on Nora's 42nd birthday, I finally saw the truth. She didn't want a mother-in-law living with them. She wanted domestic help she didn't have to pay. "I've invited my biggest client for dinner," she announced while I was making breakfast. "James Mitchell from Mitchell & Associates. This contract could make my career, so everything has to be perfect." I nodded, expecting to be included in the birthday celebration. "You'll serve dinner at 7 sharp, then disappear. This is business, not family time." The coffee cup slipped then, not because of my arthritis, but because of the casual cruelty in her voice, like I was hired help instead of the woman who'd raised her husband. "Look what you've done!" Nora shrieked. Nora, her perfectly styled blonde hair whipping around her face. "Do you have any idea how much this marble cost?" I dropped to my knees, dabbing at the coffee with paper towels while she stood over me, critiquing my cleaning technique. This was my life now. 68 years old, and I was on my hands and knees being berated by someone young enough to be my daughter. "I want this place spotless before James arrives," she continued, her voice rising. "And wear something decent for once. First impressions matter in business." Something decent. As if my church dress wasn't good enough for her precious client. But as I knelt there, something shifted inside me. Maybe it was the way the morning light caught the coffee stain, spreading like spilled truth across her perfect floor. Maybe it was the memory of Robert's voice. "Maggie, never let anyone make you feel small." I was about to discover that some stains are impossible to clean up, and some recognitions change everything. The afternoon flew by in a blur of scrubbing, polishing, and preparing for Nora's career-defining dinner. Every surface had to gleam, every pillow perfectly positioned. I moved through the house like a ghost, invisible until needed for the next menial task. "Did you iron the cloth napkins?" Nora barked from the dining room where she was arranging imported flowers that cost more than my monthly medication budget. Yes, and I've set the table with the good china, I replied, trying to keep the exhaustion from my voice. My china now, Maggie. Everything in this house belongs to David and me. You'd do well to remember that. The reminder stung because it was true. Legally, I owned nothing here. When I'd sold my house to help with their down payment, David promised I'd always have a home with them. Foolishly, I'd believed words instead of demanding legal documents. David appeared in the doorway, surveying the dining room. "Looks great, Mom." His voice carried that forced cheerfulness I'd grown to dread. "You've really outdone yourself. Your mother's been working all day," Nora said, not quite hiding her irritation. "I hope she has energy left to serve properly tonight." David's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Maybe I should help with—" "Absolutely not," Nora cut him off. "You have that conference call with Tokyo at 6. Business comes first." She shot me a meaningful look. "Some of us understand priorities." I watched my son struggle with something. Guilt, maybe, or the first stirrings of awareness about what his home had become for me. But then his phone buzzed, and the moment passed. "I should prep for that call," he murmured, avoiding my eyes. "Of course, honey. Your mother can handle everything." Nora's voice dripped false sweetness. "She's so capable when she applies herself." By 5 o'clock, I was exhausted. My lower back ached from hours of cleaning, and my hands were raw from scrubbing grout with a toothbrush, because Nora deemed the bathroom not quite perfect. "Go change into something appropriate," she ordered, not looking up from her phone where she was frantically texting. "And remember, you're serving dinner, not joining it. I don't want any awkward small talk about your medications or your husband's old war stories." The casual dismissal of Robert's memory hit like a physical blow. My husband, the man who'd worked 2 jobs to put David through college, had served honorably in Vietnam. His stories weren't rambling reminiscences. They were pieces of history, lessons about courage and sacrifice. In my small room, I changed into my navy blue dress, the one I'd worn to David and Nora's wedding 7 years ago. It still fit, though everything else about my life had changed beyond recognition. I caught my reflection in the mirror and barely recognized myself. When had I become so thin? When had my shoulders started curving inward like I was trying to disappear? When had my eyes lost their spark? 2 years of grief, followed by 18 months of systematic diminishment, had transformed me from Robert's confident partner into this broken woman staring back at me. "Maggie!" Nora's voice carried up the stairs. "Get down here. He'll be arriving any minute, and I need you to take his coat and show him to the living room. And smile, for heaven's sake. You look like you're attending a funeral." I was attending a funeral, I realized. The funeral of my dignity, my self-respect, and my place in my own son's life. The doorbell rang at exactly 7 o'clock. Nora smoothed her red cocktail dress one final time and shot me a warning look. Remember what I said. Professional service, then disappear. I opened the heavy oak door, my practiced smile firmly in place, ready to greet another of Nora's important clients who would ignore me completely. But when I saw the man standing on our doorstep, the smile froze on my face. Silver hair, still thick despite his 62 years, deep brown eyes that had haunted my dreams for decades, the same strong jawline, now distinguished by time rather than youthful arrogance. James Mitchell, the man who destroyed my life 39 years ago. He looked at me, and I watched recognition dawn in his eyes like a slow-motion car crash. "Oh my God," he whispered, his briefcase slipping from suddenly nerveless fingers. "Aren't you the woman who—" Time stopped. 39 years collapsed into nothing as James Mitchell and I stared at each other across the threshold. His face went white, then flushed red, emotions I couldn't read flickering across his features like old movie clips. "Good evening, Mr. Mitchell." Nora's voice cut through the frozen moment as she appeared beside me, radiating professional charm. "Welcome to our home. I see you've met my mother-in-law." James's mouth opened and closed like a fish gasping for air. His eyes never left my face, searching for something. Confirmation, denial, escape. "Yes," he managed, his voice hoarse. We've met." I found my voice somewhere in the wreckage of my composure. "Please come in, Mr. Mitchell." Mrs. Harrison is looking forward to discussing business with you. The formal words felt like glass in my throat, but I stepped aside to let him enter. He moved past me carefully, as if I might explode if he got too close. Wonderful, Nora beamed, oblivious to the undercurrent of tension crackling between her guest and her maid. Maggie, take Mr. Mitchell's coat. James, can I offer you a drink? I have that excellent scotch you mentioned. James shrugged off his expensive overcoat without looking at me, but when I reached for it, our fingers brushed. He jerked back like I'd burned him. Scotch would be perfect, he said, finally tearing his gaze away from me to focus on Nora. I hung his coat in the front closet, my hands shaking so badly I nearly dropped it twice. In the mirror by the door, I caught a glimpse of his reflection. He was watching me, his expression unreadable. 39 years ago, James Mitchell had been a junior associate at a prestigious law firm, married to the senior partner's daughter. I'd been a 29-year-old paralegal, desperate to support my 6-year-old son after my husband Robert's construction accident left him temporarily disabled. James had been charming, sophisticated, everything my blue-collar life lacked. When he offered to help with David's mounting medical bills, I'd been grateful. When he offered more than money, I'd been foolishly flattered. The affair lasted 4 months, long enough for me to fall in love, long enough for me to believe his promises about leaving his wife, long enough for me to make the biggest mistake of my life. When his wife discovered us, James had thrown me under the bus faster than I could blink, claimed I'd seduced him, that I'd threatened to lie about sexual harassment unless he helped me financially. His father-in-law believed him. The firm fired me without severance. Worse, they'd made sure I couldn't get another legal job in the city. Robert never learned the real reason I'd suddenly switched careers from law to nursing. He'd accepted my story about wanting to help people heal, never knowing I was the one who needed healing. Maggie! Nora's sharp voice brought me back to the present. Stop dawdling and serve the appetizers. I carried the tray of expensive canapes to the living room, where Nora and James sat on opposite ends of the white leather sofa. She was in full sales mode, gesturing enthusiastically as she described her marketing strategies. The demographics are perfect for your target market, she was saying. Young professionals with disposable income who value authenticity and experience. Authenticity. The irony wasn't lost on me as I served the man who'd once destroyed my authentic self. James accepted a canapé without looking at me, but I noticed his hand trembled slightly. Good. He should be nervous. Should be. Your mother-in-law, he said carefully. She's been with you long? About 18 months, Nora replied dismissively. She needed somewhere to go after she lost her house. Family obligation, you know how it is. Lost her house. Such a simple phrase to describe the financial catastrophe that followed Robert's death. Medical bills, funeral expenses, and a reverse mortgage I hadn't understood properly had consumed everything we'd built together. Family obligation, James repeated slowly, his eyes finding mine again. Yes, I do know how complicated family relationships can be. The weight of his stare made my skin crawl. What was he thinking? Was he remembering that terrible day in his father-in-law's office when he'd sat silent while I was accused of extortion? Or was he calculating how my presence here might threaten his current life? Dinner will be ready in 15 minutes, I announced, setting down the tray. Perfect timing, Nora smiled. Maggie's an excellent cook. She's been such a help around the house. Help, like I was a charity case instead of family. I retreated to the kitchen, but their voices carried through the serving hatch. She seems familiar, James was saying. Have we met before? I doubt it, Nora laughed. Maggie's lived a very simple life. This is probably the most sophisticated evening she's ever witnessed. Simple life. If only she knew how complicated my life had once been, or how much more complicated it was about to become. The prime rib roast sat on the kitchen counter, perfectly cooked and resting under foil, while I tried to steady my nerves enough to carve it properly. Through the serving hatch, I could hear Nora's animated conversation about market penetration and brand positioning, but my attention kept drifting to James's voice. He sounded different now, more confident, more polished than the insecure young lawyer who'd whispered promises in my ear 39 years ago. Success had given him gravitas, but I wondered if it had given him a conscience. Maggie, we're ready for dinner, Nora called. I arranged the sliced beef on the platter with roasted vegetables and Yorkshire pudding, my hands moving automatically while my mind raced. What did James want? Why hadn't he said anything about recognizing me? Was he protecting his reputation or planning something worse? In the dining room, I served them with the invisible efficiency Nora demanded. James watched my every movement, his fork hovering over his plate like he'd forgotten how to eat. "This looks incredible," he said, but he was looking at me, not the food. "Maggie's full of surprises," Nora replied, cutting delicately into her beef. "You'd never guess she used to work in law offices before she became a nurse." James's fork clattered against his plate. "Law offices?" "Oh yes, years ago, before she had to change careers. Weren't you a paralegal or something?" "Maggie?" "Yes," I said quietly. "I was a paralegal." "Which firm?" James's voice was carefully neutral, but I caught the tension underneath. This was dangerous territory. If I mentioned Hartwell, Kingston, and Associates, he'd know I remembered everything. If I lied, he'd know I was hiding something. "It was a long time ago," I said diplomatically. "I found nursing more fulfilling." "How admirable," James murmured, "helping people heal instead of fighting legal battles." The words hit like a slap. He was reminding me of what he'd taken from me. Not just my job, but my faith in justice, my trust in people, my belief that hard work and integrity mattered. "Yes, well, some battles aren't worth fighting," I replied, meeting his gaze directly for the first time since he'd arrived. Understanding flickered in his eyes. He knew that I knew. More importantly, he knew I'd chosen not to expose him. "Maggie, we're perfectly capable of serving ourselves," Nora said irritably. "You can clear the appetizer plates and start on the dishes." I gathered the plates with practiced efficiency, but as I reached across James for his bread plate, he caught my wrist. "Excuse me," he said to Nora. "Might I use your restroom?" "Of course!" "Upstairs, second door on the right." As I headed toward the kitchen, James followed close behind. In the hallway, out of Nora's line of sight, he grabbed my arm. "We need to talk," he whispered urgently. "No, we don't," I pulled away from his grip. "That conversation happened 39 years ago. Remember? You made your position very clear. Please, you don't understand. I understand perfectly." My voice was low but fierce. "You threw me to the wolves to save yourself. End of story. There's more to it than that. Things you don't know." I laughed bitterly. What could I possibly not know? "You were married. I was disposable. Your career mattered more than my life. Pretty simple math." "My wife was pregnant," he said quietly. 3 months pregnant when she found out about us." The words hit me like a physical blow. In all these years, through all my anger and hurt, I'd never known that detail. She threatened to leave, take the baby. Her father would have destroyed me completely. But more than that, she threatened to hurt herself if I admitted the affair was mutual. "So you made me the villain." I was 31 years old and terrified. His voice cracked. "I made a terrible mistake." "Yes, you did. And I paid for it." From the dining room, Nora's voice called out, "James, everything all right?" "Fine," he called back, never taking his eyes off me. "Margaret, please, can we talk after tonight? Away from here?" "My name is Maggie now," I said coldly. "Margaret died 39 years ago in your father-in-law's office. And no, we cannot talk. You're here for business with my daughter-in-law. Conduct your business and leave. But I need to explain. The bathroom is upstairs," I said loudly enough for Nora to hear. "Second door on the right." I walked away, leaving him standing in the hallway with his guilt and his excuses. But my hands were shaking so badly I had to grip the kitchen counter to stay upright. After all these years, James Mitchell was back in my life, and somehow I knew this was just the beginning. The rest of dinner passed in a blur of forced normalcy. I served the lemon tart dessert, refilled wine glasses, and cleared plates while Nora sealed what she believed was a business deal with the man who'd once tried to destroy me. James signed a preliminary agreement with steady hands, but I noticed he barely touched his food. "This calls for champagne," Nora declared when the paperwork was complete. "Maggie, bring us the Dom Perignon from the wine refrigerator." As I poured the expensive champagne, James raised his glass. "To new partnerships," he said, his eyes finding mine over the rim, "and to second chances." Second chances. The phrase echoed in my head as I cleaned the kitchen after they'd moved to the study to finalize details. What did he mean? What kind of second chance could exist between us after 39 years of silence? David appeared in the kitchen doorway, loosening his tie. How did dinner go? Everything okay? I studied my son's face, noting the tension around his eyes, the way he kept glancing toward the study where Nora's laughter carried down the hall. Fine, I said carefully. Your wife seems pleased with her new client. Good. She's been stressed about landing bigger contracts. He hesitated. Mom, about earlier, when Nora was giving you instructions about tonight. My heart leaped. Finally, he was going to acknowledge what had become obvious to everyone except him. I know she can be particular about how things are done, he finished lamely. Particular? Such a gentle word for cruelty. Your wife has high standards, I said diplomatically. She does. He shifted uncomfortably. But maybe we could work out a better system, for household responsibilities. Make things more fair. More fair. After 18 months of being treated like hired help, he was finally noticing. But his solution was a better system, not addressing the fundamental problem. That would be nice, I said, though we both knew nothing would change. David talked a good game when his conscience bothered him, but when push came to shove, he'd choose the path of least resistance. Maggie, Nora's voice carried from the study. Mr. Mitchell is leaving. See him out, please. I dried my hands on the dish towel and walked to the front hall where James stood putting on his overcoat. Nora was already heading upstairs, drunk on champagne and what she thought was success. Thank you for a lovely evening, James said formally as I opened the front door. You're welcome, I replied, equally formal. He stepped onto the porch, then turned back. Margaret, Maggie, I meant what I said about needing to talk. And I meant what I said about there being nothing to discuss. Please. His voice dropped to an urgent whisper. There are things you need to know. About what really happened. About what I did afterward. After you destroyed my career and reputation, what could you possibly have done afterward that matters? I tried to help. Quietly. Without you knowing. When David needed surgery for his leg condition. Stop right there. My voice was sharp enough to cut glass. Don't you dare take credit for my son's recovery. I'm not taking credit. I'm just saying, you're saying nothing, because you did nothing. My husband and I handled David's medical needs ourselves. Thank you very much. But even as I said it, doubt crept in. That anonymous donation that had covered David's experimental surgery when he was 8, we'd never learned who made it. The insurance settlement that had come through faster than expected. Small business contracts that had appeared just when Robert's company needed them most. Good night, Mr. Mitchell, I said firmly, closing the door. Through the window, I watched him drive away in his silver Mercedes. When the taillights disappeared around the corner, I leaned against the door, my mind racing. Was it possible? Had James Mitchell been secretly helping our family all these years? And if so, why? Guilt? Love? Some twisted sense of obligation? Upstairs, Nora was in the master bathroom removing her makeup, humming happily. What a perfect evening, she called out when she heard my footsteps. James Mitchell's company is exactly what I need to take my business to the next level. I'm glad it went well, I said, though the words tasted like ash. Did you notice how he kept watching you during dinner? Nora laughed, probably trying to figure out where to position you in his social circles. Some of these older businessmen have very traditional ideas about domestic help and social hierarchy. If only she knew how traditional James's ideas really were. Traditional enough to sacrifice an innocent woman to preserve his precious marriage and career. In my small room, I sat on the edge of the narrow bed and stared at my reflection in the dresser mirror. The same face James had kissed 39 years ago, now lined with age and disappointment. The same hands he'd held, now cracked from cleaning chemicals and constant work. I thought about the young woman I'd been then. Margaret Stevens, 29 years old and naive enough to believe a married man's promises. I'd been working 60-hour weeks to pay for David's ongoing physical therapy after his childhood accident, desperate enough to accept help from anyone who offered. James had been kind at first, bringing me coffee during long nights at the office, listening to my worries about David's health, offering assistance with legal research that helped me earn extra money. When kindness turned to attraction and attraction to affair, I'd convinced myself it was love. For 4 months, I'd lived in a fantasy world where James would leave his wife and we'd build a life together. He'd seemed so sincere when he talked about our future, so genuine when he held me after we made love in his office after hours. The fantasy ended abruptly when his wife hired a private investigator. The photos were explicit and damning. James's father-in-law called me into his office the next morning and presented them like evidence in a murder trial. Now, 39 years later, he was back with talk of helping and secret support. But what did any of it matter anymore? The damage was done. The life I might have had was gone. I was 68 years old, broke, and dependent on the charity of a daughter-in-law who treated me like hired help. James Mitchell was successful, wealthy, and respected. Some second chances come too late to matter. The next morning arrived gray and drizzling, matching my mood perfectly. I was in the kitchen early, preparing Nora's usual Greek yogurt with organic berries and artisanal granola, when she swept in wearing her power suit and triumph like expensive perfume. "I can't stop thinking about last night," she announced, pouring herself coffee from the machine that cost more than my monthly grocery budget. James Mitchell could transform my entire business. I continued arranging berries with mechanical precision, trying not to think about how James had looked at me across the dinner table. "Did you know his company represents some of the biggest luxury brands in the Northeast?" Nora continued, checking her reflection in the chrome surface of the refrigerator. "This preliminary agreement could be worth hundreds of thousands over the next 2 years." "That's wonderful," I murmured, though the words felt like swallowing glass. He specifically mentioned wanting to work closely with me on campaign development. "Can you imagine?" She paused, studying my reflection behind hers. "You were unusually quiet during dinner. I hope you weren't intimidated by having such an important guest." Intimidated. "If only it were that simple. I was focused on service," I replied carefully. "You emphasized how important this dinner was." "Well, you did adequately. Though next time try to smile more. You looked like you were attending a wake." She grabbed her breakfast bowl and headed toward the door. "I'm meeting with my design team this morning to start preliminary concepts." "Clean David's study today. He's been complaining about dust on his books." After she left, I stood in the kitchen, listening to the silence. The house felt different now, contaminated by James's presence and the memories he'd stirred up. I'd spent 39 years building a life after the devastation he'd caused. Robert had never known why I'd suddenly switched from law to nursing school, accepting my explanation about wanting to help people heal. The irony was that nursing had saved me. Caring for others had slowly healed the wounds James had inflicted, though the scars remained. I'd found purpose in my work, pride in my skills, and eventually, love with Robert that was genuine and uncomplicated. Now, cleaning David's study surrounded by law books and legal journals, I couldn't escape the reminder of what I'd lost. I'd been good at legal work, sharp and intuitive. James himself had praised my research skills and attention to detail. The phone rang as I was dusting David's diplomas. Unknown number with a local area code. "Hello? Maggie? It's James. James Mitchell." My hand tightened on the receiver. "How did you get this number?" "Directory assistance." "Listen, I know you don't want to talk to me, but there are things you need to know. About what happened after that day in Hartford's office." "I know what happened. I lived through the consequences. You only know part of it." His voice was urgent, almost desperate. "There's more. Things I did afterward. Things that might change how you see—" "Nothing changes what you did," I interrupted. "Nothing justifies letting them destroy me to save yourself. My wife didn't just threaten to leave. She threatened to hurt herself. The stress of the affair had already caused spotting. The doctor said any more emotional trauma could cause her to lose the baby. So you chose her over me." "I chose an unborn child's life over both our reputations." "But Maggie, I never stopped." "Never stopped what? Caring? You sat silent while they called me a predator and a liar." "I know. And it's eaten at me for 39 years. That's why I need to tell you." I hung up the phone, but his words echoed in the empty study, and for the first time in 39 years, I wondered if the story I'd been telling myself was complete. Had I been sacrificed to save more than just James's career? Had there been a desperate woman and an unborn child in the balance? The knowledge didn't heal the wounds, but it complicated them in ways I wasn't prepared to handle. And deep down, a treacherous part of me wanted to know what he'd meant about helping afterward. Outside, the rain continued falling, washing the world clean while my past refused to stay buried. 3 days after James's phone call, I made a decision that would have shocked the old Maggie. I called him back. "We need to meet," I said without preamble when he answered. "But not here, and not anywhere Nora might see us." "Thank you," he breathed. "There's a small cafe on Elm Street near the library. Murphy's. Can you meet me there at 2? I almost laughed at the irony. Murphy's had been my refuge during those awful weeks after I'd lost my job, when I'd sit for hours over a single cup of coffee, scanning want ads and trying to figure out how to rebuild my life. "I know it," I said simply. Murphy's hadn't changed much in 39 years. Same red vinyl booths, same smell of coffee and grilled cheese sandwiches. James was already there when I arrived, looking uncomfortable in his expensive suit among the working-class locals. I slid into the booth across from him, noting how his hands shook slightly as he lifted his coffee cup. "You look good," he said quietly. "Older, obviously, but good. Strong." "Appearances can be deceiving," I replied. 39 years ago, you taught me that lesson very thoroughly." He winced. "I deserve that. I deserve much worse." Our waitress, a woman about my age with kind eyes, approached with a coffee pot. "What can I get you, honey?" "Just coffee, please. Black." James waited until she'd moved away before speaking again. "I need you to understand something about that day in my father-in-law's office. I understand perfectly. You chose your family over me. I chose my unborn child's life over both our futures. I studied his face, looking for signs of deception. You really believe that justifies what you did?" "No," he said firmly. "Nothing justifies it, but it explains it. And there's more you should know." He reached into his briefcase and pulled out a manila folder. "After you left the firm, I couldn't just let it end. I made some discreet inquiries about your situation. Not to interfere," he added quickly, seeing my expression. "Just to know you were okay." "How considerate," I said dryly. "A bit late for concern, wasn't it? Margaret, Maggie, I never stopped caring about you. The guilt has eaten at me for decades." He opened the folder and pulled out a document. "This is a hospital record from when David needed surgery for his leg condition. Do you remember the anonymous donation?" I stared at the paper, my heart pounding. "What about it?" "That was me. $25,000 to cover what insurance wouldn't." The coffee cup slipped from my numb fingers. David had been 8 years old, still struggling with mobility issues from a childhood accident. The experimental surgery had been our last hope, but impossibly expensive. "You?" I whispered. "I couldn't undo what I'd done to you, but I could make sure David got the help he needed." "How many times?" My voice was barely audible. He pulled out more documents. "Your nursing school tuition, a few business contracts that came Robert's way when things were tight, not often, maybe 4 or 5 times over the years, just when I learned things were difficult." My hands trembled as I looked at the evidence. Not constant surveillance, but occasional interventions during our worst moments. "How did you know when we needed help?" "I kept in touch with one of the nurses from David's pediatric unit. She mentioned when families were struggling. I never asked her to tell me specifically about you, but when your name came up, you've been secretly helping us for 39 years? Trying to atone. Inadequately, but trying. Why?" The word came out as a whisper. "Because I loved you. Because what we had was real, even if I was too much of a coward to protect it. Because you deserved better than what I gave you." I felt tears threatening and blinked them back furiously. "You think money erases what you did?" "No, but I hoped it might help undo some of the damage. You don't get to play hero 39 years later, James. You made your choice. And I've regretted it every day since." He leaned forward urgently. "My wife died 3 years ago. Cancer. Before she passed, she asked me to tell you something." The words hung in the air like a challenge I wasn't sure I wanted to accept. "What?" I asked reluctantly. "She knew. About the money, about my feelings for you. She said she was sorry for what happened, but she never regretted protecting her child. A child who was now 36 years old and probably had no idea his mother had once threatened to harm herself over his father's affair." "Why are you telling me this now?" I asked. "Because from what I observed last night, you're in a difficult situation, and because I want to make you an offer." "What kind of offer?" James pulled out another document. "I'm considering semi-retirement. My company needs someone to oversee client relations. someone with intelligence and discretion to handle sensitive matters. He slid the paper across to me. It was a job description for Senior Client Relations Manager, with a salary that made my head spin. "You're offering me a job?" I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Executive-level work, your own office, real responsibility. The legal background you never got to use would be invaluable. I stared at the salary figure. Enough to rent my own apartment, maybe even buy a small house. Enough to escape Nora's casual cruelty and David's willful blindness. "This is guilt money," I said flatly. "Yes," he admitted. "But it's also genuine. You're intelligent, experienced, and despite everything, I trust you. Why would I want to work for you? After everything? Because you need independence, and I need someone who can't be bought or intimidated. Someone who's already seen me at my worst." I thought about this morning's humiliation. Nora critiquing my grocery shopping, treating me like a mental deficient who couldn't read labels correctly. "I need time to think," I said, standing up. "Of course." James stood too. "But Maggie, the offer includes full benefits and enough signing bonus to move into your own place immediately. Freedom." He was offering me freedom from being unwanted charity. "I'll call you," I said, walking away before he could see how much his offer tempted me. 2 days later, I made my decision, but not the one James expected. I was dusting the living room when David came home early from work, his face drawn with exhaustion. He loosened his tie and sank into his favorite chair, the one Nora never let me sit in. "Long day?" I asked, continuing to clean around him. "The longest." He rubbed his temples. 3 deals fell through, the boards breathing down my neck about quarterly numbers, and he trailed off, watching me work. "And?" I prompted gently. "And I came home to find my mother cleaning my house like hired help, while my wife's out shopping for furniture we can't afford." His voice cracked slightly. "When did everything get so screwed up, Mom?" I stopped dusting and looked at my son, really looked at him. Dark circles under his eyes. Stress lines that hadn't been there a year ago, shoulders bowed under the weight of obligations he'd never asked for. "When did you first notice I was unhappy here?" I asked quietly. David was silent for a long moment. "Honestly? About 6 months ago. Maybe longer. I kept telling myself you were just adjusting, that it was normal friction between women sharing a house. And now? Now I realize I was lying to myself because facing the truth meant having difficult conversations I didn't want to have." I sat on the ottoman near his chair. "What conversations?" "With Nora about boundaries, with myself about what kind of man I'd become." He looked directly at me. "Dad would be ashamed of how I've let you be treated. Your father would understand that marriage requires compromise. Not this kind of compromise. Not turning my mother into unpaid domestic help to keep peace with my wife." The honesty in his voice gave me courage. "David, I've been offered a job." His eyebrows rose. "A job? Where?" "Mitchell & Associates. James Mitchell offered me a position in client relations." "The man from dinner? How do you know him?" I took a deep breath. It was time for the truth. I worked for his law firm 39 years ago. We knew each other then. Knew each other how? We had an affair. I was young, desperate to pay for your medical bills after your accident, and foolish enough to believe his promises. When it ended badly, I switched careers from law to nursing. David's face went through several expressions: shock, confusion, something that might have been respect. "You had an affair with a married man?" "I was 29, working 60-hour weeks to pay for your physical therapy, and he offered to help." One thing led to another. I met his gaze steadily. "I'm not proud of it, but I'm not ashamed anymore either. I was human, and I made a mistake." "What happened?" "His wife found out. I was fired, blacklisted from legal work, and left to rebuild my life from nothing. Your father never knew the real reason I changed careers." David processed this information slowly. "And now this man wants to hire you? He feels guilty about what happened. The job offer is real, but it comes with complications I'm not sure I want to deal with." "What kind of complications?" Before I could answer, Nora's voice rang out from the entryway. "David? Whose Mercedes is that in our driveway?" We looked out the window to see James Mitchell walking up our front steps. "That would be the complication," I murmured. David stood up. "Did you invite him here?" "No, I told him I needed time to think." The doorbell rang. David and I looked at each other. "I'll get it," I said, but David followed me to the front door. When I opened it, James stood there with flowers and an expression of grim determination. "Maggie, I'm sorry to show up unannounced, but I couldn't wait for your answer." His eyes shifted to David behind me. "Mr. Harrison, I apologize for the intrusion." "What's this about?" Nora demanded, appearing with shopping bags hanging from both arms. "James, what are you doing here?" "I came to speak with your mother-in-law about a job opportunity," James said calmly. "A job?" Nora's voice climbed an octave. What kind of job could Maggie possibly be qualified for? The casual dismissal in her voice was like a match to kindling. 39 years of suppressed anger suddenly found its voice. "The kind of job," I said clearly, "that requires intelligence, legal experience, and professional competence. All qualities you seem to think I lack." Nora's mouth fell open. She'd never heard me speak to her like that. "Maggie's one of the most capable people I know," James said firmly. "I'm offering her a senior position at my company." "This is ridiculous," Nora sputtered. "She's a retired nurse. She has no business experience." "Actually," David said quietly, "she has extensive legal experience, something I just learned myself." I turned to look at my son, surprised by his support. "Legal experience?" Nora's voice was shrill now. "Maggie was a paralegal 40 years ago. That hardly qualifies her for executive work." 39 years ago, I corrected. "And it qualifies me for a great deal more than you realize." James stepped forward. "Mrs. Harrison, your mother-in-law is remarkably qualified for the position I'm offering. More qualified than many people with expensive MBA degrees and no real-world experience." The insult hung in the air like a thrown gauntlet. Nora's face flushed red. "David, are you going to let them speak to me this way? In our own home?" David looked at his wife, then at me, then at James. "What exactly are you offering my mother?" "Senior Client Relations Manager. Excellent salary, full benefits, and the respect she deserves." "And what's your connection to her? Beyond this dinner meeting?" James and I exchanged glances. The truth was going to come out anyway. "We have a complicated history," James said diplomatically. "But that doesn't change the fact that she's perfect for this position." I could see the moment when Nora connected the dots. Her eyes widened with understanding and malicious glee. "Oh my God, you two had an affair, didn't you?" The silence following Nora's accusation was deafening. David's face went through several emotions: surprise, understanding, and something that looked almost like admiration. "Yes," I said simply. 39 years ago, James and I had an affair. It ended badly, and I've spent decades rebuilding my life after the consequences." "I knew it," Nora crowed. "I knew there was something off about last night. The way you looked at each other, the tension at dinner." She turned to David triumphantly. "Your mother is having an affair with my client." "Had," I corrected calmly. "Past tense, and he's offering me a job, not a relationship." "This is completely inappropriate," Nora continued, warming to her theme. "A woman your age, carrying on with married men." "I'm a widower," James interrupted coldly. "And Maggie is a widow. We're both free adults." "Adults who destroyed a marriage 39 years ago," Nora's voice rose. "How do I know you won't do it again? How do I know this job offer isn't just an excuse to continue your affair?" I felt something snap inside me. 39 years of carrying shame for a mistake I'd made as a young woman, 18 months of being treated like hired help, weeks of Nora's casual cruelty, it all crystallized into a moment of perfect clarity. "You know what, Nora?" I said, my voice deadly quiet. "You're right. I did have an affair with a married man when I was 29 years old. I was desperate, lonely, and I made a terrible mistake. But do you know what I never did?" Nora's mouth opened and closed like a fish. "I never treated my husband's mother like unpaid domestic help. I never made an elderly woman scrub floors while I planned shopping trips with money I didn't earn. I never humiliated someone at family dinners or made them feel unwelcome in their own son's home." "This is my home," Nora sputtered. "Mine and David's." "Yes, it is. And I've been reminded of that fact every single day for 18 months. I turned to David. "Your wife is right about one thing. This situation is completely inappropriate, but not for the reasons she thinks." David's face was pale. "Mom, no, let me finish." I turned back to Nora. "You want to judge me for a mistake I made 39 years ago? Fine, but I've spent those 39 years earning my redemption. I became a nurse. I helped people heal. I raised a good son. And I loved my husband faithfully until the day he died. What have you done to earn the respect you demand from others? How dare you? How dare I what? Speak the truth? Point out that you've spent our entire relationship making me feel small and unwanted? That you've turned my son's home into a place where I'm tolerated at best and degraded at worst? James stepped forward. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. No, I said firmly. This conversation is long overdue. I looked directly at David. Your wife is right that I can't continue living here. But not because of some imaginary affair with James. Because I deserve better than being treated like charity case who should be grateful for scraps of kindness. David's voice was barely a whisper. I never wanted you to feel that way. But you let it happen. Every time Nora spoke to me like hired help, every time she criticized my cooking or my cleaning or my existence in your home, you chose silence over standing up for your mother. That's not fair, Nora interjected. David can't control how you interpret every little interaction. Every little interaction? I laughed, but there was no humor in it. Nora, you've spent 18 months systematically making me feel unwelcome. The only question is whether you did it deliberately or you're just naturally cruel. I've been nothing but generous to you. You've been nothing but tolerant of me. There's a difference. James cleared his throat. If I may, this is exactly why I think Maggie would be perfect for my company. She doesn't accept being treated poorly. She speaks truth to power, and she has the backbone to handle difficult situations. You stay out of this, Nora snapped. This is between family. Actually, I said quietly, that's the heart of the problem. I'm not family here. I'm an obligation, a burden to be managed rather than a person to be loved. David made a strangled sound. Mom, that's not true. Isn't it? When was the last time you asked how I was feeling instead of how I was managing? When was the last time you included me in a conversation instead of apologizing for my presence? The silence stretched out between us like a chasm. I'm taking the job, I announced. Mr. Mitchell, if the offer still stands, I accept. It stands, James said immediately. And I can help you find suitable housing immediately. Perfect. I looked around the living room that had never felt like home. I'll be out by the weekend. Mom, wait, David said desperately. We can work this out. We can set new boundaries, make changes. David, you've had 18 months to set boundaries. You've had countless opportunities to make changes. The only change that's needed is for me to leave. But where will you go? What if this job doesn't work out? I smiled at my son. The first genuine smile I'd felt in months. Then I'll figure something else out. At 68, I'm finally ready to start living for myself instead of waiting for other people to decide my value. Nora was sputtering about disrespect and ingratitude, but I was no longer listening. For the first time in years, I felt like myself again, strong, capable, and finished with accepting less than I deserved. I'll call you tomorrow about start dates and logistics, I told James. I'll look forward to it, he replied. As I walked upstairs to begin packing, I heard David trying to salvage the situation with Nora, heard her demanding he choose between his wife and his mother, but their voices faded as I closed my bedroom door. For the first time in 18 months, I was making decisions for myself, and it felt like coming back to life. Moving day arrived with crisp October sunshine and a sense of possibility I hadn't felt in years. James had helped me find a small apartment downtown, 1 bedroom, hardwood floors, and windows that actually opened. More importantly, it was mine. David had been awkwardly helpful, carrying boxes and making stilted conversation while carefully avoiding the elephant in the room. Nora had made herself scarce, claiming a sudden urgent need to visit her sister in Philadelphia. This is a nice place, Mom, David said, setting down the last box in my new living room. Good light, close to everything. It suits me, I replied, already mentally arranging furniture. He lingered in the doorway, hands shoved deep in his pockets. Are you sure about this job? Working for someone you have history with? I'm sure about needing to work, and I'm sure about being good at the job. The history is just that, history. And if old feelings resurface? I looked at my son, really looked at him. He'd lost weight in the past week, stress etching new lines around his eyes. Whatever was happening in his marriage since I'd left, it wasn't going well. David, 39 years ago I made a mistake with James Mitchell, but I also discovered something about myself. I'm capable of surviving anything, even betrayal, even starting over with nothing. That woman who fell for a married man's promises? She's not me anymore. I know. I just worry. Don't. Worry about your own marriage. Worry about whether you can be happy with someone who treated your mother the way Nora treated me. David's face crumpled slightly. It's been difficult since you left. She's angry all the time, saying you've poisoned me against her. Have I? No. You've just helped me see what was already there. He sank into the one chair I'd unpacked. I don't know if we can fix this, Mom. I don't know if we should fix this. That's not my decision to make. But if I asked for your advice, I considered my words carefully. I'd say that marriage is hard work, but it shouldn't be constant work. And it should never require you to choose between your spouse and your basic human decency. He nodded slowly. She wants me to cut off contact with you. Says if I keep seeing you, it proves I'm choosing you over her. And what do you want? I want my mother in my life. And I want a wife who understands that family doesn't end when you say, I do. The conversation was interrupted by a knock at the door. James stood in the hallway holding a bottle of champagne and wearing the slightly uncertain expression of a man venturing into unfamiliar territory. I hope I'm not interrupting, he said. I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood. James, this is my son David. David, James Mitchell. The two men shook hands with the careful politeness of people navigating complicated waters. Thank you for giving my mother this opportunity, David said. She needs to work, needs to feel useful again. I'm the one who should be thankful. Your mother is going to be invaluable to my company. I should go, David said, gathering his jacket. Let you get settled. He kissed my cheek. Call me if you need anything. Anything at all. After he left, James and I stood in my empty living room, the champagne bottle between us like a question neither of us was ready to ask. This is awkward, I said finally. Incredibly awkward, he agreed, but also necessary. We're going to be working together, Maggie. We need to establish some ground rules. Such as? Such as the fact that what happened 39 years ago stays 39 years ago. This is a professional relationship. Nothing more. Agreed. And if either of us feels uncomfortable with the arrangement, we address it immediately and honestly. Also agreed. He set the champagne on my kitchen counter. Good. Now, would you like to know about your office? For the next hour, James told me about Mitchell and Associates, the clients I'd be working with, the projects that would be my responsibility. Real work, important work, the kind of intellectual challenge I'd been craving without realizing it. One more thing, he said as he prepared to leave. The position comes with a company car. Nothing fancy, but reliable transportation. I stared at him. A car? Client meetings, site visits. It's a necessary business expense. James, you don't need to. It's not charity, Maggie. It's a standard executive benefit. Don't read more into it than that. But as I watched him drive away in his Mercedes, I wondered if either of us was capable of keeping this relationship purely professional. Too much history, too many unresolved feelings, too much guilt and forgiveness, and the strange comfort of being understood by someone who'd known you when you were young and foolish. 3 days later, I started work at Mitchell and Associates. My office was on the 10th floor with a view of the city. My nameplate read, Margaret Harrison, Senior Client Relations Manager. And for the first time in decades, I felt like myself again. The work was challenging, requiring all the legal knowledge I'd accumulated over the years, plus skills I'd developed in healthcare administration. I managed client expectations, resolved conflicts, and discovered I had a talent for negotiation that surprised everyone, including myself. You're wasted on client relations, my assistant Linda told me after I'd successfully mediated a dispute between two major accounts. You should be running this place. But I was content to be running my own life again. Small apartment, modest salary, work that mattered. It felt like luxury after 18 months of being unwanted charity. The only shadow on my newfound independence was David. He called every few days, conversations that grew increasingly strained as his marriage continued to deteriorate. Nora had issued ultimatums, demanded he choose between his wife and his mother, threatened to leave if he didn't cut me out of his life completely. I don't know what to do, he confessed during one particularly difficult call. She says seeing you makes me impossible to live with. And what do you think? I think seeing you reminded me what self-respect looks like. 2 weeks later, David showed up at my office unannounced. His face was haggard, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion. "I need to tell you something," he said without preamble. "Nora filed for divorce yesterday." I set down my coffee and studied my son's face. He looked like a man who'd been carrying a crushing weight and finally set it down, exhausted but somehow lighter. "How do you feel?" I asked carefully. "Relieved," he said, then seemed surprised by his own honesty. "Guilty about feeling relieved, but relieved nonetheless." "What happened?" David sank into the chair across from my desk. "She gave me an ultimatum. Cut off all contact with you or she'd file for divorce. When I told her I couldn't do that, she said I'd made my choice. I'm sorry. Don't be. She was right. I had made my choice. I chose to be the kind of man Dad raised me to be instead of the kind of man she wanted me to become." Through my office window, I could see traffic moving through the city center. People going about their daily lives while my family reconfigured itself around honesty instead of convenience. "David, you know this isn't your fault, right? Marriage problems that can be solved by cutting your mother out of your life aren't really marriage problems." "I know. I think I've known for a while." He rubbed his temples. "She's demanding half of everything, including the house. Says you living with us proves I was never committed to our marriage. That's ridiculous." "Maybe, but it's also expensive ridiculous." He managed a weak smile. "I might need to look for a smaller place myself." "You could always move in with your mother," I said dryly. "I have a couch." For the first time in weeks, David laughed, really laughed. "Thanks, but I think we've both had enough of intergenerational living arrangements." A knock at my office door interrupted us. James entered with an apologetic expression. "Sorry to interrupt, but we have a situation with the Patterson account that needs immediate attention." He paused, noticing David. "Oh, hello again. James, this is my son David. David was just telling me about his divorce." "I'm sorry to hear that," James said, and he seemed to mean it. "Divorce is never easy, even when it's necessary." "You sound like you speak from experience," David observed. "I was divorced once, years ago. Different circumstances, but the same sense of failure mixed with relief." I looked at James sharply. This was the first I'd heard about a divorce. "What happened to your wife?" David asked. "Mom mentioned she'd passed away. My second wife died 3 years ago. My first wife and I divorced about 20 years after." "After the situation with your mother." James's eyes met mine briefly. "Turns out marriages built on guilt and obligation don't last forever." "Is that what yours was?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. "Among other things." James looked uncomfortable with the personal direction of the conversation. "The Patterson situation is urgent." "It's fine," David said, standing. "I should get back to work anyway." He kissed my cheek. "Thanks for listening, Mom, and for not saying I told you so." "About what?" "About Nora. You never liked her, did you?" I chose my words carefully. "I liked the woman you thought she was." I had concerns about the woman she actually was. After David left, James and I handled the Patterson crisis, a contract dispute that required delicate negotiation and the kind of legal insight I'd thought I'd lost forever. Working with James was surprisingly comfortable. We'd developed an easy professional rhythm that made difficult problems manageable. "You were right about this job," I told him as we finalized the solution. "I'd forgotten how much I enjoyed this kind of work. You're exceptionally good at it. Better than I expected." "Thanks for the ringing endorsement," I said dryly. "I meant better than I hoped. I was half convinced you'd taken the job just to make my life difficult." The thought had crossed my mind. "And now?" "Now I'm too busy being good at my job to worry about making your life difficult." James smiled, the first completely relaxed smile I'd seen from him since he'd walked back into my life. "Good, because I have another proposition for you. If it involves anything personal, it's business, mostly." He pulled out a folder. "I'm considering full retirement. The company needs someone to take over day-to-day operations, someone with legal background, business acumen, and the respect of our clients." I stared at the folder without opening it. "You're offering me your job?" "I'm offering you the chance to run Mitchell & Associates. Full partnership, decision-making authority, substantial salary increase." "James, before you say no, consider this. You've already proven you can handle the work. Our clients respect you. And frankly, you're better at managing people than I ever was. I opened the folder and looked at the partnership agreement. The salary was more money than I'd ever imagined earning. The responsibilities were exactly the kind of challenge I'd been craving. Why? I asked. Because 39 years ago, I destroyed your legal career. This is my chance to give you a better one than you ever could have had before. And what happens to you? I consult part-time, play golf badly, and try to figure out what retirement looks like for someone who's worked 80-hour weeks for 40 years. I thought about Nora's casual dismissal of my abilities, about 18 months of being treated like an aging burden, about David's surprise at discovering his mother was more than a retired nurse who cleaned houses. I need time to think about it. Take all the time you need. But Maggie, you've already proven you can rebuild your life from nothing. This is your chance to build it into something extraordinary. That evening, I sat on my small balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun set over the city I'd called home for most of my life. James's offer sat on my kitchen table, a document that could transform my future if I was brave enough to accept it. My phone buzzed with a text from David. "Dinner tomorrow? I have news." I smiled and typed back, "My place, 7 o'clock. I'll cook." For the first time in years, I was excited about the future. Not because a man was offering to change my life, but because I'd finally remembered I was capable of changing it myself. At 68, I was just getting started.